Why are the players at the Pumas? They at the Pumas because no big union wants him. And if you can understand that part, you're at the right place. So if you're a player and you're at the Pumas, if you understand nobody else wanted you, this is why you're sitting here. So how do I change you from taking you away from here to going somewhere? I got to make it feel uncomfortable. If you once left me without listening, I will never take you back. If you once try to come out of your contract, if it's not the right time and not in the right way, I will never take you back. And maybe that's why I don't go somewhere, because I'm too difficult. There were so many talks about a few months ago I'm going to the Sharks, and a year ago I'm going to the Bulls, but it never materialized. And then you start wondering why. And are you so difficult? Because it's not that I'm difficult. It's just I want the stuff right, you know.
This is The Long Way to the Game, only on Megaphone Rugby.
Welcome back to The Long Way to the Game, our fan-centric podcast. Paul is back on duty in the Honduras, showing off his highway behind him, which is actually the sea. And it's just a bit of a subtle brag there, as Neil de Bruin said, or Edgar Rathbone said. So today we welcome Jimmy Stonehouse, coach of the Pumas, and one of the best known and most beloved characters in South African rugby. Paul, take it away.
Hey, Envia, thank you. And Jimmy, thank you for making time for us. As Envia talked to you beforehand, I've been away from South Africa for almost 30 years. And so my knowledge of local rugby is a little bit iffy. So the good news is I ask questions like a child. But as I dug into you a little bit, I have to say I'm super excited about this. I'm just going to give, for people that maybe don't know, you were like SA Rugby Coach of the Year a few years ago. You've won the Currie Cup with the Pumas. You've won the last two SA Cups. And then beyond that, have a really, really interesting life story and career. So welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you here.
Yes, Paul, thank you. Thank you for the invite. And thank you guys for what you guys are doing for this wonderful game. I'm glad to be part of this.
I'm going to start with I didn't know that, but I was the first matrix at Hoërskool Waterkloof. And being away for 30 years, I actually didn't feel a strong connection to the school and follow their rugby. But the first piece of information I read about you was that you were the director of rugby at Hoërskool Waterkloof.
I went to Waterkloof. I became the director of rugby. I was the first guy that started the rugby academy there. And I think I had great years there coaching the Blue Bulls, Cravenbeck side, and the Waterkloof did very well all the years since then. So obviously what a great place, great school, and a great achievement it was for me.
And earlier in your career, you were actually still actively playing rugby while you were already coaching. Is that accurate? Like when you started coaching, you were still playing rugby?
Yeah, I coached Ermelo High School, where I was at school as a student. And then I played for Southeastern Transvaal at that time, who are now known as the Pumas. So I still played while I was coaching as well.
Where in that early stage did you kind of, for the first time, think coaching may be something that I want to do?
Yes, obviously I went to the army and I had an injury and come back from the army. I started teaching, and then I only had an under 14D side to coach at the school. And then that team just played brilliant rugby and it was amazing. And then in that year, the headmaster moved me to the first team. So coached the first team, did wonders with the team, great players, well-known players. Many years after that, a lot of them played for the Bulls, and it was just amazing. And the team won, and then I started coaching the Puma, the Southeastern Transvaal Cravenbeck side for 9 years then. So obviously when I started coaching, I had a bit of luck. Teams were doing good, and then I realized there was something in for me. The biggest mistake I made was that I never wanted to leave school because I loved the kids too much. So guys like Heineke Meyer, Jake White, Frans Ludeker, we were in the same era coaching the same Cravenbeck teams at that stage, but they left for professional era earlier than I did. So obviously that gap just became bigger.
What is it about coaching that you really like? What made it so much fun that you did it for the rest of your life so far?
Obviously, the first thing for me is to see what's standing in front of you. if you can see what's standing in front of you and you can see that person's ability and to use that into the game, I think that is one of the great of things that I used to say. People used to say I can turn salt into gold. In Afrikaans, the sout en goud. And and that's, I think, the best thing I can do is like I can see the ability of a player and I can coach that ability. And with that, I think one of the biggest things comes discipline. And I think my whole life is about discipline.
Now, while I was researching about you a little bit, I think while you were still at Weerskool Waterkloof, you had like a really interesting thing in your bio that you were the coach of the Russian sevens team and actually even appointed the coach of the 15s team. Could you talk a little bit about that? And did you do that from South Africa or did you go to Russia or how did that work?
Yes, obviously the Russian under-20 team trained in South Africa and they need a coach to help for a little bit. And so I helped them and we had a big win against Stukkies, the university in South Africa. And then they asked me to take the under-20 team to the FIRA tournament, of the under-19 team to the FIRA tournament in France. So at that stage, I coached Weerskool Waterkloof, where Gary Botha, the former Springbok, played for me at Waterkloof. So he played for the Boks in that FIRA tournament in France. And then I became the coach of Russia in that FIRA tournament in France. And then the team did very well there. And then they asked me to coach the Russian seven-a-side team and in Mar del Plata in 2001. So, yeah, that's 25 years ago. And I won the plate final in that tournament. So, yeah, obviously I got the job as the 15s coach, but I didn't do that.
During that time, did you ever have to visit Russia or spend time in Russia?
Yeah, I went to Moscow quite a few times. I stayed there for long, a month or two. And I also went to Krasnoyar in Siberia, where I stayed there as well. So, yeah, I had a bit of time in Russia and actually a great place. It's actually a great place.
Jimmy, why did you not take up the position? This is a matter of interest as a head coach.
Yeah, obviously at that stage it's also difficult. You hear a lot of stories about it's difficult about Russia. You know, they rugby wasn't that big sport at that stage, and it's difficult when I always wanted to make it in my own country, and then I had an opportunity to coach a big club side in South Africa, and then I took that club side, and from that club side I got an opportunity. That club side won a Turkish twice, and we won the Gilbert Trophy in Pretoria, in the Northern Transvaal region, and then the Pumas approached me to get the job at the Pumas.
And what club side was that?
Harlequins.
Gary Botha's now at Harlequins. You just mentioned him.
Yes,
Okay,
Gary now at Harlequins, yeah.
So you kind of moved into that. So after this Russia stint, which is quite interesting, that's when you moved to the Pumas for the first time as the head coach. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I went there in 2008. And coached there until 2014, went to Japan for 3 years and came back in 2018, again to the Pumas.
But in between that, you did something else, which is quite interesting, that had nothing to do with rugby. Can you talk about that a little bit? Your Mr. South Africa and Mr. Universe competition?
Yeah, I loved I used to do arm wrestling. It was just for some fun. And then at one stage, I realized that maybe I should take part in bodybuilding. And so I started at 40. And then I won at the age of 40, I became Mr. South Africa and went to Mr. Universe in France, Perpignan. And I came sixth there in my weight category. So, yeah, obviously, I enjoyed that, still training hard. It's a way of life. And I'm still enjoying that.
Do you still do that, like powerlifting or bodybuilding type of stuff now?
I don't compete anymore, but I still train every day and still eat clean and still do all the stuff you got to do. So, I always like to take that to my team. You know, I always tell them, if you eat cake, you will look like cake. You know, so I try to be the example for them to be in shape, and I think it's also a good measure for them.
Is there something that came from that background, that sport, which is very different than rugby in a sense, but I'm assuming there's like a lot of overlap in terms of mindset and discipline. Is there something that you think you learned from that sport that has helped you a lot on the rugby side?
Yes, obviously the discipline of eating healthy, that's the first thing. Training hard, that's the second thing, and always be on time because you had a training partner, and in that job in that game, it's very very important. So in rugby, it's the most important thing. I always say, rather an hour early than a minute late, and I think that's one of the biggest things that worked for me coming from bodybuilding into the sport of rugby. The hard training, I know what it is to train hard. I know, I always say you have to make someone uncomfortable to get him comfortable. So if you don't put people through that hard training and make it uncomfortable for them, when the time comes where they really need it, they had to do it before. Otherwise, they won't get through it. And I think I got that from bodybuilding.
I want to ask you a chicken and egg question here, because the one thing that, whenever we talk to anybody about GB Stonehouse, the one word that always pops up is discipline. You've mentioned it now more than once as well. So did you do well at bodybuilding and rugby because you had discipline, or did you learn discipline while you were doing those sports? I'm just asking about your background and stuff. Where does this discipline thing come from?
I came out of a house where discipline was very, very important. And I played at a school where the coach who coached me, discipline was very important. We were a great team. We also sing, and we still sing at the Pumas. But discipline always, I can't remember the movie, but 1 second too late or 1 second too early. I think it was, I don't know who's the guy in that movie, inch by inch and a yard by yard. And that's the truth in this game. If you just miss that lift in a lineup with 1 second, or you're too early, or then you miss the game. And that will always stick with me when I coach. I will always use that for the guys to explain to them that part of it.
Discipline, growing up in a disciplined household, that's sort of, you and I and Paul are more or less the same age as well. Times have changed a little bit. We saw some very famous coaches having to fall on their swords because of the way they disciplined their team. Let's be diplomatic here. How have you adjusted to the new reality? The younger guys not really liking or taking to discipline, or is that something that's a non-negotiable for you, that they have to fit in with that culture?
The method still stays the same. It's easy to adapt to one person than it is to adapt to 50. And if you can, I'm still the same as I've been 30 years ago. Discipline is exactly the same for me. I just think it's not what you say, it's how you say it that changed. In the earlier days, it was easy to say something in a different way. Nowadays, you can still say the same thing, but you can say it with a smile when it doesn't sound the same. But I think it's one of the things that I've learned from nowadays rugby players. But everything stays the same. There's no change in it.
Can I ask you to follow up on that a little bit? So if I look at your career, you've coached everything from like a high school team to a Russian national team to a provincial team that I'm sure have different styles and culture. Did your philosophy of coaching, so I get the discipline part, did it evolve over time, or how else than what you just said now did you have to adjust as you went through those different age groups, different cultures, languages?
Just to come back to my coaching career a little bit, in 2001, I coached the Springbok 7-a-side women's team who won the Africa Cup. And then I coached the Barbarian side in South Africa, the North and the South side. And then I coached the Royal Bafokeng against the British Lions. The Barbarians played against England. So yes, obviously, it differs from team to team. When I coached Toshiba in Japan, I had a Richard Kahui, a Liam Messam, a Corey Jane, all those guys, Michael Leach played for me. So the one thing you must realize, with all the teams in South Africa, and I can say this and it's going to sound strange, but the last place you want to be is at the border or at Pumas or at the EP, because you want to be at the Bulls, the Lions, the Stormers, the Sharks. So obviously, I got to change your mindset from making you believe you can get back on top. So why are the players at the Pumas? They at the Pumas because no big union wants him. And if you can understand that part, you're at the right place. So if you're a player and you're at the Pumas, if you understand nobody else wanted you, this is why you're sitting here. So how do I change you from taking you away from here to going somewhere? I got to make it feel uncomfortable. I got you to believe that you can do stuff. I got you to gel into a team so that the team can win. Because if the team win, people will take you. If you want to do stuff and the team doesn't win, people, they don't see that cohesion. They don't see the team that's doing great. And that's the thing you got to change at the Pumas. So when I went to Toshiba, the training was much different from the training what I do at the Pumas. Because here, I still got to push you into doing stuff and make you work harder and test yourself. Working with Springboks and All Blacks and all those guys, it's a huge different coaching those guys from compare coaching them here at the Pumas.
Jimmy, that's so interesting because, I'm, like I said, I'm more or less the same age as you are. And it's difficult to talk to young people nowadays. If I have a young guy sitting there and he's not been signed by the Bulls or the Stormers, and you tell him that you're here because nobody wants, how do they take that? Or how do you tell them that without demoralizing them almost, and actually using it as something to motivate them? That's quite a tricky thing.
There sometimes must be honesty in life. I mean, you can tell people stories and they can believe it, and then they can sit at the same place for 5 years. But you can tell them the truth. Why am I sitting at the Pumas? That's the first word I always ask him then. Then they say, no, you appointed here, nobody wants me. Because if the Bulls wanted me, would I be at the Pumas? When somebody else wanted me, will I be at the Pumas? So for me, I'm in the same boat. Then they'll say, Coach, but you've been in Japan. I say, yes, I was in Japan, but I'm now at the Pumas. Nobody wants me now. So you're at the same place. But I can promise you, working through this, you will go somewhere. Last year, we lost nine players going to different unions. At this stage of the season, already 6 going. 3 is going overseas and 3 is going to different places in South Africa. And that's the thing that became a reality in South Africa. If you go to the Pumas, you will end up somewhere. And the problem with that become then, it's difficult to build your team because the players don't want to sign for 2 or 3 years because they believe now in their first year, they will make the step up and go somewhere.
And I ask you about that, though, because what you said is true in life as a rule, is at some point you reach the top of what you're going to reach. And if you don't know that, it can be very frustrating if you think and in other cases, it's just a stepping stone to the next step, and you just have to keep working. How do you know? Let's start with the players. How do you know, and how do you help them know when the Pumas are the pinnacle of their journey? That is where they're going to stop. That's as high as they're going to go, versus where it is what you've just said. It's just a stepping stone, and they have to believe and work harder and hone their skills to go to the next level.
If you go into the Puma Stadium and into the gym and you walk, there's a lot of slogans on the wall where it says, what you do on and off the field will echo into eternity. If a coach have to show you in every meeting on Monday the same thing, you're uncoachable. So I put that stuff out there for players to see it, to really understand. If I have to show you the same thing, and I talk to them a lot of times, I will call them and say, listen, you're playing at the Pumas, you made 3 of the same mistakes. If you were playing at the Bulls and you made this mistake twice, you're gone. And that's the only way you can really show players where they can change. And if they then still keep on doing the same thing, surely for themselves, they got to understand that that's where it stops. Someone asked me once, but don't I want to keep the players at the Pumas? Yes, I want to build a team. But if I keep the same players the whole time, the same thing is going to happen. Nothing is going to change. It's like a business. If you're doing the same stuff, your business stays the same. You want to grow. So I got to make that players better, make them believe so that they can go somewhere, so that the next guy can come in to make the Pumas better. And you know what? For this, a player has got to become a leader in his position. If he cannot take charge at the Pumas in his position, whether it's lineouts, loose forward play, backline play, he can never go to a big union. And I sit a lot of times with them speaking about this. You know, a player plays brilliant, and then a big union makes him an offer and he sees the money. But can he make the decision when he's standing next to the next Springbok? Or is he the guys that just listening, going to a big union? Because if he goes to the big union and he's just listening, then he's not a leader in his position. Because he got to go somewhere and give an input that can really work. And that, for me, I can see that easily at the Pumas. That's why when we do our contracting, we can see in 2 years' time, this guy is going to leave. This guy is going to take another year. And then I will sometimes sit with players and say, don't leave now. Don't chase the money. It's not the right time. And some of them do leave. And then after a year, that place, release him. And that's when the biggest issue for that player comes. Because I won't take him back. And that's the discipline part for me. If you once left me without listening, I will never take you back. If you once try to come out of your contract, if it's not the right time and not in the right way, I will never take you back. And maybe that's why I don't go somewhere, because I'm too difficult.
You don't take yourself back. No, that's quite an interesting thing. I said, I was in my car driving somewhere, and next to me was one of your ex-Pumas players. Everybody thought he was going to be the next big thing, and he rarely gets any chance to play. I'm not going to mention his name. And I was wondering about that. Maybe the money is there. Maybe he plays one or two games a year. If they ever put their feelers back out to you, that's just a no. It's not going to happen.
If a player's contract is finished and they make him an offer, yes. But if you have a contract and in the year you want to leave your contract, you want to get out of it because there's an opportunity for you now, that's wrong. Life doesn't work that way. You don't buy a car when you don't want it anymore, when you just give it back. But you only learn that when you start with your own business. And people start doing the same thing back. Because you got to remember, as soon as a big union wants you, it's because of 39 other players around you that did their part to create you and make you something. Yes, you had the talent and you did your stuff, but other people helped you. So you got to finish your season. You got to go through your season. You got to give back. You got to have the loyalty. Loyalty is not something that you buy. Money suddenly comes and then you want to jump. Life doesn't work that way. And if you miss that opportunity, it was not meant to be. It was meant to be, and that's life.
Just on that subject now, you mentioned 39 other players. Let's talk about squad size and budgets and stuff. I know Paul's got a lot of questions around that. But squad size, how big is the Puma squad actually?
We are 41.
In total? That's now including juniors and everybody, or is it just the senior players?
Yeah, no. We don't have juniors. We don't contract juniors. We don't have the money for that. Although when June, July come, we play trials for the juniors, and then we put the team together. But they're not part of the professional system.
Okay.
I want to come back to this conversation we were having just before that, but I'm going to just park it for the moment. To come to your Pumas squad, so you were with the Pumas, then you went for 3 years to Japan, and then you've come back to the Pumas now for this stint. Could I first ask you just how different was coaching in Japan?
I think it's one of the best places in the world. Going to Japan and see the discipline was actually great and amazing for me. I fitted in very well. I fitted in with the food. Those people got to work. A word, karoshi, they work. They don't stop working. And if you see me, I like that. That's something I love. You got to take them off the field to stop them from training, because they overdo it. So the coaching, the Japanese players, some of them still work during the day, and then you had your hours where you train. So the professional guys, Frans Steyn, who played for me, and all the others, they didn't work, so they just come to training. So, but they on a different level of. It's almost if every one of those players can play in the professional side. So if you take Toshiba, even the Japanese players in that side, they're at a high level, because Japanese rugby is not so that people think it's not brilliant. It's great rugby. So the Japanese developed quite a lot in the last few years. And it wasn't difficult for me to coach there because the only way, I didn't need to do the fitness. I didn't need to push them in a different way like I did here with my team. Because when you say something, they listen the first time. Because you got your Corey Jane and your Liam Messam and your Michael Leach, and those names around you, those guys just make a different aura in all these teams. You know, sitting with Japan's captain in your squad. What do you want more of that? His English is fluently, he translates, and it's just a great vibe. It's just great to coach there.
Did you learn to speak a little bit of Japanese, or did you coach in English and a translator would translate? How did that work?
I coached in English and I had a translator, but at the end of my third year, I started speaking Japanese really good because you had to have an hour class twice a week. Every week, it's in your contract, you have to have it. So yeah, but you know what? If you don't do stuff every single day, you start to forgetting about it. But yeah, it was actually great.
Just quickly, before Paul continues, Andre Pretoria is a good friend of our channel and of us, and he's actually coaching in Japan at the moment. Second division side, Hino Red Dolphins, just so you know.
Andre phoned me before he went there and he asked me, what do I think? And
is it? That's so interesting. Yeah,
that's the best thing to do. If you can go there, you must go.
He's flourishing. He's absolutely flourishing over there. Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, Paul.
Then when you left there, what made you decide not to stay longer and return to the Pumas?
Every coach believe that he can make it in life. So that is the question I always ask myself, and that is the thing I always talk to the players quite a lot. When do you make it? And when do you make it when you a national coach? Do you make it when you're URC coach? Do you make it when you're just a Currie Cup coach? When do you make it? For some people, making is when you're a Springbok coach, and I always work to try to become a Springbok coach. But there's so many people that wish they were just in my shoes. For them, for a lot of people, or millions of people, I made it. But you always got to strive to be better. And when the president of the Pumas at that stage contacted me and said the Pumas are going to play in the URC, he wants me to come back, I decided that this is my opportunity to come back. And that there was always talking about the Pumas and Griquas will play in the URC, but that never never happened. So I came back, and never happened.
I was surprised when you said that. Yeah, sorry.
Then I came back from Japan and I won the Currie Cup. And you know what? When I went to Japan and we won we played in the first the professional final there. I think, maybe this is my opportunity. I will go somewhere. Coming back from Japan in South Africa, win the Currie Cup, being the coach of the year. And then you realize, you know what, maybe you're not the guy. Maybe it's not meant to be for you. And then your vision change. You try to make your own team getting into an international competition, because that's what I'm fighting for at the moment. So luckily there's a competition coming up for us, but I think you will talk about it a little bit later.
Could I ask you not to go back to the earlier discussion where you were talking about players? You said something, by the way, I love your directness and your bluntness. Even though I have an American accent, I like directness. You said, I am at the Pumas just like a player because no one wanted me from let's call it the bigger unions. So in this case, what at this stage of your career is your dream? If you could wave a magic wand, is your aspiration, I want to be at the Bulls, or I want to be at the Sharks, or I want to be on the Springbok coaching team? Where are you in terms of that player journey that you talked us through earlier?
There were so many talks about a few months ago, I'm going to the Sharks, and a year ago, I'm going to the Bulls. But it never materialized. And then you start wondering why. And you know what? Sometimes I open the newspaper and they say the difficult guy with the arms the size of a rugby ball. And then you think, are you so difficult? Because it's not that I'm difficult. It's just I want the stuff right, you know. And then I start thinking, does people pick people around them because they can be the boss, or do you pick the best guys around you to make it work? And then I decide I'll keep that answer for myself. And but for me, I will always like to coach the Springboks. But at this stage, I'm fighting for my team to get in the international competition, because if I can get them in the international competition and they can get that exposure there and the players can get it there, then your contracting becomes easier and all that stuff. You know, when you only play in a SA Cup and a Currie Cup, even look at the Cheetahs. The Bulls can sign any player they want due to money and due to the competition they have. Cheetahs are not in that similar position, but they got an EPCR where they play in. So that's also exposure for players, because that's what player want. And we only have the SA Cup and the Currie Cup. So for me to can get into a international competition where they see my players also can be valuable for our union, getting more money, getting more sponsors, and getting more players. And the big thing for me in South Africa, and I ask this question, and people will kill me for this, but I always say this. There's so many talent in South Africa. If you take, let's take 10 years back. If a player 10 years back, he cannot be that old. He can still play. So where's the Cravenweek players from 10 years back? 9, 8, 7, 6, 5 years back. Why can't we have 14 unions in South Africa playing brilliant rugby? Why is it not there? I understand money is difficult. I understand television-wise and all that stuff, it's difficult. But can we be better? Or are we okay with only this island, a 4-club setup? Are we only okay with what we have? Because there's so many brilliant players in South Africa, and now we accept that and we don't expand it. I believe there's so much space for more brilliant players. Even the Currie Cup can be a huge competition in South Africa. If you look at France, their second division competition, how many people go to that games? Why not in South Africa? South Africa's a rugby country. Yeah, I don't know where the problem is, but I believe we can make it brilliant.
I have 1,000 questions right now. I have to make sure I don't scatter into different. So let me first ask, you mentioned this opportunity to play in an international competition. And I, for one, don't know what that opportunity is. So what is the opportunity you're working towards getting the Pumas into?
Yeah, obviously we also trying South African Rugby Union to get us into a competition. But at this moment, due to the Cheetahs, where they involved with Toyota, we're playing now in a competition coming where we play Georgia, Romania, and Portugal with the Cheetahs and Griquas. And then after the Currie Cup, we're flying over to Georgia and play those same teams there. So that's a little bit of international competition. So if that can work, so maybe from there on something else bigger and greater and better can come for the teams like the Griquas and the Pumas and Boland and all those guys. Who never knows?
Yeah.
So here, related to that, is a question for me that's confusing to me as a person just kind of re-entering South African rugby. Like, your team has won, the Pumas have won the SA Cup 2 years in a row. I think you've been in the final.
We played it 3 years, but we won it 2 years in a row.
2 years, but you were in the final in the first year too, weren't you?
Yeah.
And the year before that, you won the Currie Cup.
We played the
correct?
final in the we played the final, and the year before that, we won the Currie Cup. So it's our 5th final in a row now.
So that's pretty. So this is the confusing question that I can ask as sort of a, like, I don't know all the details of South. Like, how is it that you still have to qualify to play in the Currie Cup each year? Like, why by this time aren't you, and the Griquas for that matter, just like automatically part of the Currie Cup?
Yeah, you know what? That's a question we must ask SA Rugby. But you know what? It's also difficult if I'm at a union like the Falcons, and they now say the Pumas don't need to qualify. They won't like it. You understand what I'm saying? I understand rugby-wise. You know, I'm 16 years at the Pumas, and out of that 16 years, 3 years I was in Japan. And out of that 16 years, the Pumas played in 13 finals. And of that 13 finals, I was 12 at the Pumas. whether that was First Division, Currie Cup, whatever competitions South Africa made. Out of 16 years, the Pumas played 13 finals, which I think is not too bad for a small union.
Jimmy, what do you think is the future of the Currie Cup? I mean, just, if you had your way, there's no, limitations in money or anything like that. Is it better to go back to maybe a 14-team Currie Cup, double round, stuff like that?
If money is not an issue, and we can play a full Currie Cup with 14 unions, and it's strength versus strength, I think that can be great for South Africa. You must understand that the URC is bringing in the money and not the Currie Cup. So all the big unions will tell you it's not, the Currie Cup doesn't count anymore. Or I think a lot of people at SA Rugby don't think it counts anymore because money-wise, the Boks will take the money. We won the World Cup. We're the world champions. We're the best in the world. And so we have to look after those guys. But I think there's so much more in our country for rugby that a Currie Cup can be great. How do you change it? How do you get the money? I believe if we can have a system where we can, the team last in a lock can pick the first under 20s this year and next year this guys can pick. And so you can build the country's rugby. But I do understand money-wise it's difficult because I know how we struggle to get money. It's not that easy. So I do understand how smaller unions than us struggle. So I believe how difficult it is.
You also mentioned strength versus strength, but there's no way the Bulls, for example, against Falcons can be strength versus strength. I'm just giving random examples here. How would they overcome that? I mean, apart from the money, you get them to get better players and likes, but it's going to be very lopsided very quickly, don't you think?
Yeah, it will take a long time. It will definitely take a long time. But you know what? If they cannot do it, they can make it 8 teams that plays a double round. There's a lot of things you can go to. So what do you give to spectators at the moment? You're playing in an SA Cup, which is not televised. You're playing in a single round Currie Cup where you only play 6 games. You only see the 2 of the big unions at home. What do a suite owner buy? What do a sponsor get back?
True.
So all that things is the things that's what's bothering me going into the future of rugby in South Africa. And if you look at SVD this year, if you look at the Falcons this year, those guys, they played great rugby. And that just said to me that, yes, if we try, and I know SA Rugby does their best, there's only so much televisions, and there's only so much super sport, and there's only so much money. I do understand it. But that's just my vision. Blaming no one for what's going on. I just think there can be a way where, and I don't know how, because money at the end of the day changes everything.
This SA Under-23 thing where they brought in 7 senior players, I mean, isn't that maybe the way for the bigger teams to play in Currie Cup and, bring the younger players in, maybe make it 3 or 4 of the senior players, something like that? Isn't that maybe the way to go for the bigger unions to be able to make it a bit more of a level playing field?
I think that's it. That is what we tried to do. But then suddenly we get into this conversation where if they play Currie Cup, they don't have enough players to play in URC and in France, in all the different competitions. And now you have my players who forces you to take a few weeks rest. So all that things come into conclusion. So easy for me where I sit and want my competitions to work. So for me, I see just the great part of it. But believe when you're sitting at the big union and you're an Ackerman and those guys, you see a different picture. And then you got my players, and then you got Rassie who wants guys to rest. So yeah, obviously it's easy where you sit where I am, sitting and looking from their point of view. Maybe I'll have a different perspective. But yeah, you got to fight where you are, and you got to fight for your union.
Jimmy, on that, 2 follow-up questions. One, I heard you talk about like what sounds like an American football drafting system where the worst team gets the best pick in the next year's draft. And then secondly, I've always wondered why rugby hasn't adopted the English football promotion relegation type of thing, because that would allow teams like you to have a vision of working your way up the pyramid, and teams at the top are not guaranteed that they'll always be there if they don't perform. Is that something like, is there a mechanism where things like that get discussed within SA Rugby, and do the smaller unions like the Pumas and the Griquas have a voice in those conversations?
Yeah, I believe every union has a voice, but I believe rugby in South Africa has gone too far for a smaller union to get on top. Saying that, I mean the name Bulls and Stormers and Sharks is so big identity for people outside South Africa and inside South Africa. I see it very, very difficult to change. I cannot see it that it will ever change. That names, I cannot see it change. It's because that's the teams that bringing in the money. They bring in the TV games. They bring in the money from overseas. They play in that competitions. They the team with the Springboks, and that's how people see it. Everybody see it. Sponsors see it that way. Television see it that way. So it's going to take South Africa a long time, if ever it can change that a small union gets on top.
How frustrating is that for a small union and the players at the small union and the coaches and the administrators? Like, I understand that reality, but isn't there an element where you just feel like no matter what we do, no matter how good we are, nothing is really going to change? Or is it just something that motivates you every day to?
Yeah, you know what? Loving my job, loving the game, loving the players that you coach, and giving them a job, and they survive, and they look after their families. And you know, if I look at this six that's going away from us now, one is going to Harlequins, one is going to Sale Sharks, one is going to Glasgow Warriors, one is going to the Bulls. You know that, and then you realize, you know what? There is place for a union like us because they are going somewhere, and only if we can make this union much stronger. Same with Griqua, same with Boland, everyone. There's so many of these players that can go somewhere. How are we going to get it right? It's a big frustration. You know, if you take the SA Cup at the moment, and I do understand why, it's a qualified competition. You got to qualify, but there's no television. There's no TMO referee. So if there's maybe a mistake and you lose and you don't qualify, you lose all the money you get from SA Rugby. So there's an axe on your head the whole time, and it's a big competition you have to qualify for, but you don't have the best resources. So if that actually make it, you got to have nerves to get through this. It's not. I can just imagine how Frans Steinfeld with the Cheetahs being this big name, this big union, and then suddenly you stare a loss in the eye. And if I feel this way, if my nerves is nerve-wracking, how does that happen? You know, so I can just believe. And it's the same with Jake when he coached, and Ackerman when they sit there and they don't win the URC. I believe everybody's nerves is the same, but they still have big sponsors. That same sponsor come in every single year, and Vodacom stays there, and Vodacom back them. But at the Pumas, if you don't win, you lose that SA Rugby's money. It becomes less. Boom, and then suddenly you lose players. And yeah, to have an axe on your head, maybe that's what's keeping me younger on my toes. I don't know.
Alternatives. There's lots of talk about URC B League, for example, and even talk about maybe some South African sides, most notably the Cheetahs, maybe going back to Super Rugby. Any truth to that, maybe? Any merit?
Yeah, I don't. You hear so a lot of stories, but you know, I came back to South Africa to play in the URC, and it never happened. So,
10 years ago.
I only what you see. That's the only thing you believe nowadays. So, but yeah, I believe SA Rugby is trying. I believe with Frans Steyn at the Cheetahs, he's also trying hard to get that there's more competitions and stuff. It's great to have a guy like him on board. He's really trying. Because being a Springbok, now being a coach, and he sees what it is around him, and I believe he understands. And speaking to Heineke Meyer, he said to me a week ago, you know, for the first time, I know he was at SVD years ago when rugby was different, but then he was at the Bulls for long. And now he's sitting at SVD, and now he realized what it is to get sponsors and having that axe on your head. And then suddenly life changes for you as a coach. And with those guys on board, I think maybe they can come something can become out of it. I hope so.
I've got a feeling there's something brewing somewhere, Jimmy. But you're very coy, so let's leave it there.
I hope so.
I have just two more questions to ask you, Jimmy. I think we could go much longer here. The first one is, like, this is really such a storied career. I did my research here because I didn't know your story that well. And still, you've given me a bunch of facts that I didn't find in my research. And it's like an onion that you're peeling back. And they're all impressive stories. In that journey, what has been the highlight for you? What stands out at this moment as the highlight so far?
Every time when a player comes back to me and say, thank you, I never understand why we had all the rules or the discipline, but I do understand it now.
And my last question is, I want to go back to what you said about the coaching and your desire to be a coach either in the URC at a different team. Do coaches get feedback like you give your players feedback? Has someone ever told you, like, Jimmy, this is the reason that the Sharks haven't given you a job or the Bulls haven't given you a job? Or is it something that you have to guess at?
You know what? I sometimes sat and then I wonder what would the reason be? Sometimes, you know, or not sometimes, in life, you create your own story. And when I was younger, it's not that I was the easiest guy. I would say stuff as it is. I sometimes made my own bed, and now I have to lie on it. Maybe I was a little bit too arrogant when I was younger. So yeah, I think a lot about that. You know, nobody ever told me. I always just hear that it would be difficult to work with me, because for me, I'm a straight shooter and stuff. I don't change stuff. You know, when I go out with my players and I have a beer with them, tomorrow everything is the same for me. I don't change. I don't have a friend tonight. You're not my friend tonight, and you're not my friend tomorrow. You know, it's the same thing for me. I don't see a player. I see the person in front of me. I don't. If I pick a team, I see the team. You know, it's different for me. And I sometimes wonder why they say people cannot work with me, because it's having better people around you that can make it better. It's not having weaker people around you and you can just go on with your way. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say.
No, I do.
I sometimes wonder if it's that. But yeah, maybe I made my own bed, being too arrogant and being too outspoken. So, cannot change who I am. So
there's a lot of talk about players or coaches being too close to their players, too friendly with them, you know, a bit of a hand on his cower kind of approach. You're not that guy. And what do you think of those coaches? Is there a place for that in the modern game? Or do coaches have to be a bit more strict and a bit more distant almost?
No, you know what? I'm very close to my players. There's a lot of them I'm very, very, very close to. All of them, in actual fact, after each game, I'm the guy that will open an account and say, guys, let's have a beer, you know. I'm that guy. But tomorrow morning, that's over and done for me. And that's me. I can put the party together and I can make it work. But tomorrow morning, I'm the first one there. And then all that party from last night is gone. And that's who I am. I'm not a guy. I don't stop you from drinking. You're supposed to know when you got to stop. I'm not the one that's telling you this is how it works. You got to know how it works. But I'm also the one that will open a tap and say, guys, let's have a beer together. Then at least I know where they are, you know. And then we'll have that drink together and we'll have a lacquer party. But I'll be the first one tomorrow at work. And when stuff is not right tomorrow, I don't see over it and I don't mislook it because we had a party last night. Everything is exactly the same for me. So I'm very close to my players, but they know where to draw the line and not to draw the line.
Jimmy, this is my final question to end this, I promise. We talked about a lot of different things that would, in your mind, make rugby better, that you'd want to do. If you had a magic wand except being the Springbok coach, except for that, of all the things we talked, if you could make one thing be that way next year, what would it be? Would it be the Pumas in the URC, you coaching the Bulls? Is there something that just one wish that you would say that would be my one thing?
The biggest wish that I wish for is that I can get a big sponsor, but in any way, to play in a URC, to have the money to build a team to play in the URC. I think that would be one great moment for me.
Jimmy, thank you so much. You spent a lot of time with us. I appreciate it. And we had our technical challenges, but we worked through it. So thank you so much. And Paul, I think you can take this one home.
I don't know. I just want to say, Jimmy, it's easy to say that it's an honor to speak to someone, but I just want to say it really for me was a privilege to talk to you. I learned a lot. I appreciated your frankness, and I'm so impressed by your career and what you've done and your passion. So thank you very much for making time to talk with us.
Yeah, guys, thank you for your time, and thank you for taking time to have the chat with me. And thank you for what you guys are doing for rugby. I really appreciate it.
This is The Long Way to the Game, only on Megaphone Rugby.